Hello and welcome to the Calling the Real You podcast. I'm your host, Pamella Horton, and I call the real you out with special guests like the one that we have today. My goodness, you all are in such for a great show. We're talking with the best-selling author, editor-in-chief, and publisher of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series, Amy Newmark. And we'll be discussing her new book, Best Mom Ever, 101 Stories of Gratitude, Love, and Wisdom, just in time for Mother's Day. Now, before I introduce Amy, please allow me to share just how much I appreciate her work and the entire series of Chicken Soup for the Soul. They are such heartwarming and in many cases life-changing stories. You may not know this about me, but these books, along with Leo Bruscalia's books, were really, dare I say, my Bibles. Growing up into my early 20s, right into my 30s, and even till today. And you're going to love these 101 personal stories in her new book, Best Mom Ever. Again, they are heartwarming and even hilarious anecdotes about all the adventures of motherhood. A wide variety of entertaining tales in 10 chapters, including Moms to the Rescue, Adventures with Mom, Wise Words, By Heart Not by Blood, which happens to be one of my favorites, Maternal Miracles, A Mother's Legacy, and My Role Model. And that's where Amy Newmark comes in. Amy is a publisher, as I mentioned, editor-in-chief and author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. She's the woman responsible for the last 140 Chicken Soup for the Soul books, and she's put all of those out since she and her husband bought the company in 2008, where she is credited with revitalizing the Chicken Soup for the Soul brand. Amy, welcome to the Calling the Real You podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on, Pamela. I'm so excited to be talking about this book, which turned out to be a very meaningful book to me because I originally created it to give to my mother on Mother's Day, and I spent a year working on it. And the day that I was going to start editing the stories that I had chosen for the book, the 101 stories out of 5,000 or 6,000 that were submitted, my mother was rushed to the hospital, and I started editing the book while I sat by her bed in the hospital, and unfortunately she died 6 days later. So I edited this tribute to mothers while I was dealing with my mother's death, taking care of my father, moving him to assisted living, etc. So it turned into a very emotional journey for me, creating this book, and I poured every ounce of my energy into it and did my very best job editing it. And I think it's really good, although I have to say I'm still a little bit shell-shocked, but I think I really poured my heart and soul into this one.
It's gorgeous. I've had some time to dive deeper into the stories, and I agree with you. It's one of my most new favorites out of all of the series. And it is absolutely, you can tell that there's for me anyways, from being a fan and from have read the books over the years, there is a different energy behind this. And thank you for sharing your story as to where it came from and how it came about. And of course, please accept our condolences for losing your mom. It's not easy in many cases, and you might agree here. I too have lost my mom. In many cases, for those of us who have lost a parent, we may become closer with them after they pass. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, reading the stories as I edited them for Best Mom Ever, I felt myself learning more about my mother. And then, of course, going through my parents' house, because since we did move my father out to an assisted living, I've been going through the house with my siblings, and my brother just basically likes to throw everything out, and I have a more sentimental view of things, and I like to look at everything and then throw it out. So I've been going through everything. I mean, laughing sometimes, like, why did my mother need 100 vases that she saved from flower deliveries? Although I have to say I probably have 20 in my own house. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but I've been going through all her stuff. And actually all of the stuff that my father has been hoarding also, and getting to know my father better too, even though he's still with us. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience getting to know my mother through going through her things, seeing how organized she was. So it's been a real voyage of self-discovery because, of course, you are your parents' child, and you do reflect on how they conducted their lives. And when I see how impossibly organized she was, and then I look at my own little notes at home about things, I think, oh, my dear, my children would be laughing too if they went through my things.
Mine too. Yeah, totally agree with you on that. It's what a journey to be able to explore everything that's been in their home, really. Amy, tell me, as you were going through and editing the book, what stories stood out most for you and why?
The whole book is very meaningful to me. And by the way, I didn't mention this to you, but I told you we got 5,000 or 6,000 submissions for the book, and we could only publish 101. But I had such a hard time narrowing it down to 101 because I had, almost 200 fabulous stories that we actually made our 2018 Mother's Day book also.
Oh, wow.
So when our book comes out next year, our 2018 Mother's Day book, it's going to have the stories that weren't in this one. There's a whole other class of stories ready to go because the stories were so incredibly good. But I think what stood out for me the most, and it could be just because of where I am right now in my life and my relationship with my mother, is the last chapter of the book is called A Mother's Legacy, and it's the stories where people are saying goodbye to their mothers. And, if you've lost your mother, you still need to read stories like this. It really helps. And we know that at Chicken Soup for the Soul, we get letters all the time from people saying, I lost my mother, I lost my this, or I lost, whoever they lost, they go and they read stories about that relationship, and it really helps them. So this last chapter of the book, with all of these stories about a mother's legacy, there was one that really stood out to me. It's called Shelter in a Storm. It's by Trudy Nash. And her story is about 3 days after her mother's funeral. And Trudy has gone to her mother's house and she's been cleaning stuff out. And her car is now filled with the leftover flowers and also a whole bunch of her mother's things. And it's pouring rain outside, which is very appropriate for how Trudy was feeling 3 days after her mother's funeral. And Trudy sees this family out in the rain, a father, a mother, a baby, and a toddler, and they have no umbrella, and they're just being pelted by the raindrops. And she looks in her car and realizes there's no room to even put one person in the car. But then she spots her mother's leopard print umbrella, because, of course, her mother had a leopard print umbrella, right? Because there's a lot of leopard print, I must admit, in my closet, too. And so she hands the umbrella out the window to the father, who gratefully and puts it up over the mother and the two kids. And then Trudy talks about how it's really so symbolic of what a mother is, because she is like your umbrella that shelters you from life. And I ended up using her story as the inspiration for the introduction I wrote for the book, where I said that that umbrella was so symbolic and that our mothers are our shelters for whatever storms pass through our lives. They are our umbrellas. They're our cheerleaders, our chief advisors, and they are our role models. And this book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Best Mom Ever, really does have a lot of stories on those themes. And what I learned also, and maybe you did too, is that after your mother passes, she's still there with you, and you still feel all of that support and the unconditional love and all of that appreciation. You still feel that bond, and I still feel buoyed by the support of my mother, even though she's not here.
100%. I do share that with you. Even more so, because in some of the stories that we have with our own mothers, right? There are different phases of our lives that take place, and we could have a tumultuous relationship with our mom, we could have a super close relationship, but it's never one way all of the time throughout our lifetimes with our mothers. And absolutely, even though our mothers have passed, I communicate even more with her. I appreciate her even more. I understand even more so where she was coming from. So it's really a remarkable gift. And to your point earlier, that people go to these stories for solace or encouragement or empowerment, that's what I meant earlier when I mentioned that these books have been a staple in my life, where I would be experiencing a grieving or a celebration, and I literally would just open up the book and flip through the pages, and I feel like either I was intuitively guided or the book knew which story I needed to hear most. And I feel very much so about this one, and thank you for sharing it with me, so I could get an understanding and just really dive deep into the stories and get to know the authors more. Amy, when you were editing it and as you were going through all of the stories, was there a common age that the contributors were at, or a common point in their lives that they were at, that they began to appreciate and feel immense gratitude for their mothers? Or was it all over the board?
I think it was all over, but of course, many people talked about not really appreciating their mothers until they were in their 20s or they became mothers themselves, because you don't really understand what a mother does until you're a parent yourself. But we have stories where people were appreciating their moms even when they were 6 years old, although, of course, they're writing the stories now and they've had all those years to reflect. Mm. And then we have stories from people who say, oh, I was a rotten child. I was awful to my mother. And now I really appreciate the unconditional love and acceptance she showed me, even when I was being so awful. We do have those confessional kind of stories as well.
Mm. You and I was grateful. You and I did have a conversation previously a few days back, and you were sharing the story about, or you had mentioned something about how learn to appreciate all of the quirky things or the things that we really outdo ourselves on for our children. Do you recall that story?
Well, we have so many stories about moms really being heroes and coming to the rescue of their children and sticking up for their children and just showing, they'll do anything. And it reminds me, one day my husband was looking out the window in our backyard and he saw a mother deer chasing a coyote at top speed, and the coyote was fleeing from this irate mother deer. And I've always thought that mother deer was, that's what we do too. We'll chase down a coyote if we have to protect our children, even though it was supposed to be the other way, Mm-hmm. So, one story that I thought was really cute was by Terry Riley, and she was 6 years old and she was looking out the window, and it was another rainstorm. We seem to have a lot of rain in the book. And Terry had one of those imaginary friends that you can have when you're a little girl. Oh, yes. And her imaginary friend was out by the mailbox in this terrible storm. And Terry was crying, and her mother said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "My friend Mary is stuck out by the mailbox." And so Terry's mom put a bathrobe over her shoulders like a cape, ran out into that rainstorm, grabbed the imaginary friend inside the bathrobe as if she were holding her, and ran back into the house holding the imaginary friend. And Terry was so grateful to her mother for having done that. And I thought that was so cute. And I thought it was such a good story, because here she was, a 6-year-old, and now she's an adult. And she remembers when her mother did that wacky thing and went along with the imaginary friend thing. And it shows that when you do those things for your kids, even when they're little, you do make an impression. They do remember, they do appreciate you, and they will probably use you as their role model. And so your grandchildren will get that same wonderful treatment that you gave to your own children.
That was the story I was thinking of. Thank you. I love that. How validating to your own child, another human being, to value them and their relationships with an imaginary child, so much so to be able to wrap them up in that bathrobe and bring them into the home. And that's just such a powerful example of really what this book is about.
Yeah, there's some really amazing stories in this book, things that just are so surprising to me, like stories that sound like this should be, in a TV movie. Like we had one story from a guy whose mom worked at a CVS, and one day at the CVS, she was opening up the store and she saw a shopping cart with a crying newborn baby in it. And she took that baby and went through the adoption process and made that baby her own. And her son, Derek, wrote the story for us. It's called Meant to Be. And she didn't tell him until his 14th birthday how she had found him and adopted him from a shopping cart at CVS. And Derek points out in his story how meant to be it was, because he and his adoptive mom actually have the same defect in their foot, and it's the same foot and the same toe. They both have the same birth defect in that toe.
Oh, I just got goosebumps.
Yeah, we have a whole chapter, By Heart, Not by Blood, about adoption, stepmothers who become like real mothers, etc. It's really sweet. And of course, it really does drive home the point that being a mother does not require that you gave birth to the child. Being a mother is about everything that happens after that.
Absolutely. You know, there's a statement that I've grown accustomed to and really like it, and that is, our children do not come from us, they come through us. And as a mom or as a caregiver, whether you are adopted, stepmother, even a motherly figure via an aunt, there's so many ways to be able to influence another's life. And then the rewards that come from that in our own lives are just immense.
There's a great story by Tina Mattern. So Tina had two parents, but her mother had given up custody to her father, and then her mother had gone and gotten remarried and had new kids. Her father remarried, and Tina's stepmother didn't really want her around, and Tina's biological mother didn't want her back, and so her father put her up for adoption. And this lovely couple came along and adopted this little girl who was unwanted by her two living parents. And Tina was a very ungrateful, scarred little girl, and was just awful to her adoptive mother for a long time. She would tell her that she wasn't her real mother. She didn't have to listen to her. Tina would wet the bed several times a night, and her new mother would uncomplainingly change the sheets 3 times a night and just say, "Don't worry, honey, it's not your fault." And her mother was just fabulous to her, and Tina repaid her with nothing but scowling and disdain. And then finally, when Tina learned that this mother wasn't going to let her down the way that her biological mother let her down and her stepmother let her down, finally Tina, after a long time, was willing to return her love, and they ended up having a really great relationship. And so I thought that was an amazing story about this really fabulous adoptive mother who worked so hard to bring around this scarred little girl.
That's beautiful. Amy, the book cover itself is purple and white, and it has a butterfly and irises on the cover. Is there specific symbolism between or behind the color choices and the flower and the butterfly for the book?
The irises were the flowers that I had at my first wedding, which was the marriage that my 2 children came from. So I've just always loved irises, and I just thought it was really, really pretty. And the butterfly, our graphic designer put there because he just thought it was pretty, and it tied it all together.
Yeah, no,
so that was him.
I love it. Well, unbeknownst then, in terms of the symbolism, the butterfly is all about transition and transformation. And irises are about spring bloom and new beginnings. And you can really caveat that or tie that into the stories, at least the ones that I've read, which is what prompted the question. They really are stories of transformation, and they are stories of new beginnings, growing into your powers of gratitude and love and wisdom that have been handed down to you. And just for me, that was what the symbolism I wanted to make sure. I was curious.
Yeah, I love irises. I always try to make our Mother's Day books look really, really pretty, so that you're not just giving a book that's filled with beautiful stories, but that the physical book is a beautiful thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when in your travels through these stories, the 2 top qualities that makes the best mom ever, what would you say were or are?
I think another theme was mothers giving kids their attention, because mothers are busy and often have more than one child. And what kids really want is that undivided attention, because they really are depending on their mothers. If there's anyone in your life you want support and acceptance and unconditional love from, it's your mother, right? That's the most important person to you. And so one story that I loved, it's called A Pot of Tea. It's by Margie Williamson. And she was a freshman in high school and had a really tough time her first day. And she walked home and went inside, and her mother could see how upset she was. And her mother went and made a little tea party for them. She made a pot of tea. She had some cookies, and she sat and talked to her for an hour. And her mother started doing that every single day throughout her freshman year and her sophomore year. Every single day when she came home from school, her mother would be waiting with a pot of tea and cookies and listening. And as a result, Margie shared everything with her mother, and her mother really supported her through 9th and 10th grade, which can be tough years. And Margie has never forgotten that, has never stopped being grateful for that amazing amount of time that her mother gave her, no matter how busy her mother was. She set aside that time to give her daughter her focused attention.
That is gorgeous. The paying attention is absolute. It's the new currency. If you were talking about business, it's not new currency. It's currency. And I once was told years ago. I'm a social worker by trade, and in my trainings, having children is a lot like having a bank account. And I don't mean to make this trite or materialistic by any means. Hear me out for a second. When you place attention into your child, you will receive back what it is that you put into them, whether it's nothing or some or all. And that story is a beautiful testament to that.
Well, I think you're right. We all work so hard when we're raising children. We work so hard at it. And sometimes we're dispensing advice to them that they don't want to hear, and we just soldier on and give them the advice anyway, figuring it will somehow get in there. And we do all these crazy things for our kids, and we make all these sacrifices. And so it's so wonderful for a mom or a grandmother to read these stories and know that it actually was worth it. It worked. Your kids really do appreciate it, and you really did make a difference.
Absolutely. Wow. Is there another attribute for making a best mom ever?
I think that people love it when their moms are funny also and go on adventures with them. And so we had a whole chapter called Adventures with Mom, where, kids just talk about doing funny things with their mothers. And this could happen at any age. For example, we have a contributor named Alin Chaplik-Olesko, and she is 71 and her mom is 91. And they both had to get hearing aids at the same time. And they were just laughing so hard at the fact that they both lost their hearing. They both needed to wear hearing aids, and they were having so many adventures together with their hearing aids. And so it just shows that this relationship goes on no matter how old you are, what generation you are. You could still have these fun moments with your mother, and kids love having fun with their mothers, because so often mothers don't get to be the fun ones, right? Mothers have to be the ones who do all the hard work, when they have to do the cleaning and the cooking and the educating and the advising and the disciplining, and somebody else is getting to do the fun stuff. And so I think when moms get to have fun with their kids and be wacky, kids love it at any age.
It's actually something I wish I did differently. I now have a 19-year-old daughter, and I was always very serious and very much about doing things right and proper, and of course in her earlier years. And I kept that seriousness throughout our nature, and dispensing information and teaching her and educating her and things of that nature. But I wish that I had more fun with her, for sure. That was something that I did not tap into until latter years.
I tried to have fun with my kids even during those years when I had to be the serious, mom. But I remember driving my kids on field trips and cranking up the music and just horsing around in the car. I remember getting in trouble, actually. Got in trouble with the teacher, but that was okay. because the kids and I got in trouble together.
That's a sweet story in itself. Amy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I can't believe we're rounding up to the end of our time here. And would you do me the honor of joining me again in the future on another topic, perhaps?
Absolutely. We have some great topics coming up, and we're actually collecting stories for some books on wonderful topics. One is called My Kind of America, and it's about the kind of America that we really do live in, a kind, tolerant America where we care about one another. And then I have another book we're collecting stories for called Step Outside Your Comfort Zone, about trying those things you're slightly afraid of and then doing them, and what it does to your life and how it makes you proud and how it makes you feel dynamic. And so maybe we'll talk about one of those in the future, and maybe your listeners will want to submit on the chickensoup.com website. You go there, you click on submit your story, and you can see if you can become published in one of these books.
I love it. Thank you for the offer. Thank you for agreeing to join me in the future. I love those two topics that you just stated. So important. The kindness, the kind of America that we are currently living in, and stepping outside your comfort zone is so important for growth. So I can't wait to hear and read those stories. For those of you who have joined us, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And how is it that they find the new book, Best Mom Ever?
Best Mom Ever is on sale everywhere. In fact, we already had to do an emergency second printing because it's been flying off the shelves, but it's at Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, I think it might be at Rite Aid, Kmart, Target. It's in Canada at Indigo, at Costco, Walmart in Canada. It's everywhere. It's a very popular book, and it's already on the Nielsen BookScan bestseller list.
Congratulations. It's a fabulous,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a fabulous gift to give to your moms, especially if you have a hard time expressing just how much you love and care for your mom. It really truly does make a remarkable gift to give to her, because she's going to feel that energy from those stories, and coming from you, she's going to know that you feel very similar and want to share how much you love her if you have a hard time expressing your own words with regards to your family and loved ones. So again, thank you, Amy, so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your time and energy with Amy and myself here on the Calling the Real You podcast. I wish to thank a few other folks, our sponsors, including, my husband, Eric Horton, who's also my best friend and business partner. Without him, all of this would be much more difficult for me to accomplish. And I wish to thank Sacred Story Media, and Lisa Imperante of Lux Salon and Spa, Yola Portraits, Karen DeFelice Designs, and the transformational music by Jim Oliver. Thank you so much for your support, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and remember, call the real you out.